fixed, but I'm freer than I ever thought I'd be. Of course, I'm past the age of childbearing years. And so I thought, well, I'm just never going to get to have kids because my eggs are cooked. And then a couple of years ago, some friends of mine talked to me about adoption. And they said, Lise, there's some kids that they don't even have the shot at a mom and a dad. So would you pray about that? And by the grace of God, I am becoming a mama. I've been in the process. I'm in the process of adopting a little girl I think is just the most beautiful, brilliant pumpkin. Her name is Missy. I know. She is in Haiti. I met her a year and a half ago, right after her mama died of AIDS. And my Missy has HIV and used to be very, very sick. And I have the huge privilege of being her mama. And I should have her home by Christmas. And I'm convinced that we look exactly alike. Because I've always wanted to be brown. This is the fun. I never wanted to be a monkey. I always wanted to be brown. That's what we call them in Tennessee. But I just cannot believe God has redeemed that chapter in my story. And y'all, I just want to encourage those of you who think there are lost causes in your life. There are no lost causes for God's daughters. He redeems things that were broken. I mean, who would have ever thought that a woman who's having hot flashes really would have kids? I so identified with Sarah in the movie last night, except my hair is colored. So other than the fact that my hair is chemically dependent, I could so identify with an older woman being the mom to a young child, and we're so excited. But those of y'all who may be in the process of adoption, or you've adopted children, you know people who have adopted children, you know that it's a hard road to hoe. I feel like I have been for the last year and a half that I've been in the process of formally adopting Missy. I feel like I've been hiking a mountain in rollerblades in the rain. I mean, it is a tough road to hoe, and sometimes it's awkward. I had one of my more awkward moments recently. I was down there in June, and I was going down to see Missy, but also I had to file some formal papers with the U.S. Embassy. How many of y'all have been to Haiti? I mean, Haiti makes the Mojave Desert feel like Big Sur. It is so hot. I promised Jesus I would be a missionary in Africa if he would just give me some ice when I was in Haiti. It's so hot. And I got there and I was staying at a guest house right outside of Port-au-Prince. And if you're at a guest house in Haiti, it's kind of like a bed and breakfast in America, only without a bed and breakfast. But it's kind of like that. And I was staying there, and I had to get up really, really early because my appointment at the U.S. Embassy was at 7 a.m. So I got up at 5:30, and when I woke up, in the heat of that 112 degrees in this tiny, tiny little primitive room in Haiti, I was just shocked because my aunt had come to visit me without telling me. And I want to be really, really careful because we've got like 4 men in the audience. But my aunt had come to visit me. Are y'all with me? If you have any slow girls next to you, just whisper what I'm talking about. Now, my aunt has not been for a visit for about 6 months. And part of me was sad about that because, you know, it makes you feel old. But then part of me was, of course, thrilled about that because I get so tired of those grumpy weeks when I gain weight just by looking at food. And so I wasn't sure whether to celebrate or be sad that Aunt Flo had come for a visit. But here's the deal that made it really complicated. I had not brought any aunt paraphernalia because I hadn't brought my purse to Haiti. I just brought a backpack. And you know how those of you who you haven't seen your aunt in like a decade, you still have aunt paraphernalia at the very bottom of your purse, like stuck to a Mento. You know how girls are like that, like an 83-year-old would be like, oh yeah, it's right here in my purse. You're like, why? You still have that harpoon in there. But anyway, I had no aunt paraphernalia, and so I thought, oh man, this is going to be complicated because I've got to go to the U.S. Embassy and then to Haitian High Court and Low Court. It's 112 degrees. I'm going to be away from the restroom for 12 hours. in a skirt. And I thought, I've got to find some paraphernalia. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to go down there and I'm going to have to talk to the proprietress of this guest house. Her name is Madame Suzette. She is 83 years old. She also doesn't speak English. So I thought this is going to be interesting. So I went downstairs and I found Madame Claudette and I said, Madame Claudette, do you have any feminine products? And she looked just kind of confused and she said, pardon? And I said, do you have any feminine products? Because I thought maybe charades would help at that point. And when I did that, I could tell she got it at least a little bit because she stepped back surprised and she went, oh, oui. And then she turned to a housemaid behind her, probably about 16-year-old girl, and they had a conversation in Creole. And the girl looked at me horrified, so I thought, I think she gets it. And then the girl scampered off, presumably to get Aunt paraphernalia. And so then I'm just standing there with Madame Claudette, and it's very awkward because Haitians who have bed and breakfast or who are educated, there's this real high sense of propriety. It's like being at a Seventh Baptist convention. They're just very appropriate. And so I'm standing there and you're just kind of awkward and she's shifting back and forth and I'm shifting back and forth. It's real awkward. And then she breaks the silence by saying this. Your hair looks très belle. That means your hair looks very beautiful. And I thought, oh, that's so sweet because it's 112 degrees and it's 90% humidity. I thought my hair looked like roadkill. So to have her say my hair looked très belle, I thought, well, that sure is sweet. And I said, oh, thank you so much, merci, Madame Claudette. And she said, do you use the long one or the short one? And it was my turn to be confused. I said, pardon? And she said, do you use the long one? You know, it was her turn for charades. And I went, oh, yes, ma'am, I got you. I mean, normally I do almost always bring a flat iron with me. I love flat irons because my hair is really on me. So I almost always have a chi, but I wasn't sure about the electrical, the transfer, and so I just brought a blow dryer. I didn't bring my chi, but I always bring a blow dryer because my hair is so thick I have to use a blow dryer. And then she seemed literally alarmed. And she stepped back even further, and her eyes were huge, and I thought, dadgummit, I thought we'd really connected about the whole hair thing. I was starting to feel close to her, but I could tell I had just really offended her, and I wasn't sure why. About 30 seconds later, a little house girl comes running back in. She's got a tampon in one hand and a maxi pad in the other, and she said, do you use the short one or the long one? And I was like, oh, you're kidding me. Madame Claudette thinks I blow dry my hair. I can't believe this. They are never going to invite me back to Haiti. I've trampled all over Haitian propriety. Just in case y'all thought any of us who have the privilege of this stage and the microphone have it all together, none of us do. Y'all, we are prodigals waiting to happen. God uses donkeys and rocks. And that's one of the reasons I love this book. This is not a rule book. This is not a book about having good behavior. This is a book about a perfect God who is absolutely enamored with messy women like you and me. With women who trample all over propriety, with women who have muffin tops, with women who don't fill in all their Beth Moore blanks. He loves us, y'all. It's in here. If you brought your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 5, and we're going to look briefly at the story of a man who may be the most mistake-prone man in the New Testament, which is why I so identify with Pete. Luke chapter 5 gives us the beginning of Pete's time with Jesus as a disciple. Now, you know, prior to Luke 5, he had already met Jesus. Do y'all remember who introduced Pete to Jesus? And y'all can talk back. It's not Sunday morning. Do y'all remember who introduced Pete to Jesus? Andrew, his baby brother. Andrew had said, hey, Peter, I think I've met the Messiah. The Christ whom we've been praying for all these years. I think I've met him. His name is Jesus. He's a carpenter up in Nazareth. And Pete said, "Oh, Andrew, you are so gullible. I mean, all you do is watch QVC and buy those Chia Pets. There's no way. This guy is the Messiah." And y'all remember in the first century, thousands of men had proclaimed, "I'm the Christ, I'm the Christ, I'm the Christ." Most of them actually had mental issues. And so it wasn't unusual for someone to claim to be the Messiah. So Pete thought, this is just another one of those yahoos who's saying he's the Christ. There's no way some guy in Nazareth is Emmanuel. This is the second time Pete meets Jesus. And the story goes like this, Luke chapter 5, verse 1. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, that's Pete's official name, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let your nets down for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we've toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken, and so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything, and they followed Jesus. Now, to add a little color to this black and white story, some of you may already know this, but Pete, James, and John fished for tilapia on the Sea of Galilee, Lake Gennesaret. That's literally what it was. It's a freshwater, white, flaky fish. If you have the privilege of going to Israel, and I've spent a month there, they call it St. Peter's fish. We would call it tilapia. If y'all went to, what are the cool grocery stores? Y'all have Whole Foods. So if you went to Whole Foods, that's what you would ask for there. It's tilapia. And the way they fish for tilapia is they would take out flat-bottomed boats on the Sea of Galilee late in the afternoon, and then they would light oil lanterns on the perimeter of those boats. And then as the sun was setting, insects would gather around those oil lanterns. The fish would come up, the tilapia, from the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. They would feed on the insects, and they'd throw cast nets over the side of the boat to catch the tilapia. So they weren't like hunky Brad Pitt. They didn't do, they didn't do the kind of a river runs by it fishing. They weren't bass fishermen. They didn't use a rod and reel. They were cast net fishermen. They fished at night. Pete has fished all night long and hasn't caught one single fish. How many of you have husbands or sons who fish? What are they like when they come home from a trip and the cooler's empty? They're grumpy pigs, right? And so, in my imagination, Luke doesn't explain this, but I think Pete's a little grumpy. He's sitting on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, mending his nets. It's hot. His cooler is empty. Jesus, this guy that his gullible little brother thinks is the Christ, comes walking up and he says, "Hey, Pete, I'm giving a devotion, but the people in the back can't hear me. And so I thought it'd be cool if I got in your boat and we just kind of put out in the water a little bit, because I know the water will amplify my voice like a karaoke machine and everybody will be able to hear me. Is that okay with you?" I'm taking the tiniest bit of liberty with the Greek here. But Pete says, "Cool. I'd be delighted if my boat could be